Well, it's time to start learning about seam finishes when you're working with knit garments, constructing them. Well, we all know that seam finishes are really an important role in a woven piece of fabric when it is sewn. Keeps it from unraveling, and all of the extra strings and everything, bits and pieces, are all taken care of, and it looks very neat and clean inside. Well, we do know, though, that knits don't unravel. Of course, there's some that will. If you have some very loosely knitted fabric, it could come unknitted. But for the most part, I'd say even maybe 90% of all knits you sew, that's not the case. However, we do use a seam finish on our seams when we sew a knit. The main goal is to eliminate any extra fabric from flopping around inside. We want it to look as neat and clean finish as the outside does. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. This particular seam finish is with the serger, but we're going to discuss how we can do this without the serger. It's just clean inside. There's a little bit, but it's clean. There's not. It's covered. Our raw edge is covered, and we're not going to think twice about this not being professionally done. In fact, if you look at your own sweater, sweatshirt, t-shirt, pair of leggings, something that you have that you've purchased, a knitted garment that you've purchased, it's going to either have just a small amount like this, or it's probably going to be completely flat inside. No extra seam allowance anywhere. All right. So the first one that we're going to talk about belongs in a category that is probably my favorite. My favorite. It really is when I'm stitching with knits. And it happens to be on our sheet. All of the seam finishes we're going to talk about are all under 17E. There's 17E-1, 17E-2, and 17E-3. They're all on the same portfolio page, however, and they flow together. And the videos, though, are separated by each one. This is what I was saying, 17E-1 is one of my favorite seam finishes. Just like I was saying, it's definitely one of my favorite. I'm going to zoom in here just a little bit. It's using the top stitch. Using a top stitch to not only give a decorative moment to the outside of the knit, but inside, it is all now very clean. There's no loose fabric anywhere. The seam finish is neat, lays flat, not bulky. And on top of it, if you use a contrasting thread, you get a really beautiful detail to your garment. Now, again, word of caution, when you use a high contrast, now I want you to use the high contrast thread in your samples. That I definitely want you to do. But when you use it on the real thing, on your garment, you may end up with wobbly lines, not looking so neat. So if you do not want to have it be that noticeable in contrast, then you would use the same color thread. All right, well, how does it begin? It begins by sewing your seams. And here I have pre-sewn one using the little wobble stitch. That is our little wobble, narrow zigzag. So it's a good sturdy stitch. And then once you've gotten that in place and checked it to make sure it's not running here with the needle and the stitch size that you used on your sample. You would come back to the ironing press here where I'm at, and you would be steaming this open. Yes, we do press certain operations still on knits, as we've maybe discussed a little bit before. We definitely would press this. Give it a little bit of steam, and then let it sit just a tiny bit, and have a beautiful pressed open seam. Now we're going to go back over to the sewing machine, and pick up from where we left off, and we will finish adding our top stitching. Just a word for the wise, don't assume that it's your normal kind of top stitching. When we get over to the machine, we'll talk about that. See you there.